talks about the practice model. Now, this is a model that the Australian Childhood Foundation have provided largely for schools, looking at children and developing a framework for working with them. And this practice environment, as it's called, tries to create a sense of predictability in a child's routines, connect the children to relationships with peers and adults who are supportive and consistent, keep children calm, build child's memory and cognitive functions as a way of them understanding their experiences of abuse and the effects of it, contain and influence children's behaviour associated with fear, anger, shame and disconnection, and support children to shape their internal emotional reactions. So that the letters of the word practice cover the key areas. So the areas are P for predictable, so that's an environment that's familiar as possible and feels safe. R is for responsive, so we respond to children's behaviour, responses to children's behaviour should always stem from an understanding of the trauma-based origins of that behaviour. A is attuned, so the more we're attuned to a child's patterns and also their patterns or their processes of responding, the better we're able to understand them and help them understand their own reactions. Because ultimately, they need to recognise these patterns that they have and learn to self-manage. That may take a long time. As was talked about here, even learning about developing an individual learning plan for a child with trauma may take years. And so this learning is slow, and that's the difficult part for carers. It's a difficult process, but I think with a better understanding of what's behind the behaviours, we're more able then to be effective with these children and not re-trigger them and also not create more stress for ourselves. The C, number 4, is connecting, and it's about implementing strategies that build emotional literacy. Now, emotional literacy is children understanding feelings and developing a vocabulary of feeling words. Because when we express feelings, we process them and they dissipate. So it's important for a lot of these children, because they're so stressed a lot of the time, there's no connection with emotions. And we're trying to teach them a connection with emotions. And the first step in that often is, what's the feeling? What's the physical feeling? And what emotion are we attaching to it? And what I talked to you before about doing a chronology of the day can involve then them talking about feelings in situations as well. And starting to become more accurate in understanding feelings, developing a vocabulary of feeling words and being able to express them. The translating largely relates to the children's understanding of their trauma. So children who've experienced trauma struggle to build stories of understanding because of the impact of the trauma. So they often need what we call a translator to assist them to process, in the process of recalling and remembering. So in some ways we act as a translator, and the translator may be, you had your visit with Mum and Dad. I'm thinking that you said that you got a bit scared during the visit, and I think that Dad's voice being raised was triggering for you. And that made you scared, and then you closed down for a while. So what I'm trying to do is translate. This is what's happened. I'm trying to translate so you understand what's happened and why. So we play that translatory process. The translation might also be, I know earlier on when I told you that we weren't going to the shop at 4 o'clock and you got really aggressive, I think something triggered for you then. And I think perhaps it was building and I didn't notice it. Because the other thing that comes with the issue of shame is so significant for kids with trauma, because often they're behaving in a really inappropriate way. They're not able to, often been unable to talk about it. And so what comes with bad behaviour is a sense of shame. And it's important for us when a child does act out is in some ways to be restorative afterwards as well. And restorative might be to say, we're okay. You're safe here. You're not leaving this place. We've got to, and also that I'm not going to continue to be angry with you or cold with you about stuff. We may have a consequence of a behaviour, but it's trying to prevent a sense of shame, because shame feeds into this negative self-image, which means they're more likely to be overreactive to situations and more easily triggered. The involving is trying to assist the children in having relationships with their peers. Because it's knowing that one of the key factors in this training is knowing that relationships are healing for kids with trauma. The more they have relationships, the more stable they get, the less likely they are to be triggered, the more positive they feel about themselves and others. The C is for calming, which is trying to facilitate positive outcomes for these children. We need to support them in finding ways to be calm and to be able to be consistent with that and practice that. They need to be able to self-regulate, and we need to work out techniques for that. So for some children, there's a child I'm working with at the moment who, I think it's a mixture of trauma and attachment, but she flips her lid very, very easily, and she's been out of class. She's in about grade 5, and she's been out of class a lot because she gets aggressive, because she's so reactive to the slightest negative statement made by one of her peers, and she'll throw things and puts other children at risk. But what we worked on initially is a number system of arousal. So what number are you? And if they're in a moderate state, so what do we need to do about it? What we're trying to do there is help them to sort of recognise their arousal, use that as a feedback to other people like the teacher. So the teacher might say, where are we today? The carer might come in and say, look, I need to let you know she's at an 8 at the moment. Okay, thanks for that information. Or it might be that the teacher has a relationship with the child where they're able to get some feedback on where their arousal's at. And then it's assisting the child or having strategies yourself to bring their arousal down. And for some kids, especially initially, asking about feelings is just too overwhelming for them. But asking for a number is a safer place to start with. But it's trying to engage them more in strategies for what to do about it. So if I'm an 8 or a 9, then the strategy might be, I need to go outside and have some space for a while away from people, because I'm either going to feel threatened or I'm going to get aggressive and hurt someone. And then when my arousal is down, I'll come back into the class. But for that to occur, the teacher needs to have a mechanism for that. We need to already have discussion around, okay, what can the child do? Does someone need to go with the child? How do they come back into the class without feeling ashamed or threatened or anything like that? So it needs to be worked on to work as well, and it needs the teacher's engagement with that. And the last letter is engaging, which is building supportive adult-child relationships. So it's also making them aware, it's you being aware, what other adults in this child's life can I see as key adults that are also going to try and engage with the child, understand their trauma, and for them to develop more child-adult relationships. So they need to develop child-adult relationships as well as peer relationships. And they're not going to do that without a great deal of assistance from us, and they're not going to do that without the adult being very skilled up on the child's issues and actively engaging in it, and probably being aware of this stuff as well. But all of those things assist the child in stabilising, bringing their arousal down, being able to engage, learning, and being less triggered by a whole range of issues that might cause a traumatic response. If we look at predictable environment, there are so many things that trigger children with trauma, and predictability is so important, and what we often find is it's very hard to have predictability all the time. We also find that over time, the more familiar the routines are, the more the child becomes safe with them. But often, as I said earlier, children don't remember the routines, and sometimes we need to have visual cues to let them know, okay, this is the morning routine, this is the timing of it, this is the afternoon routine, because they don't remember. Or if they do remember, it takes a long time for that learning to occur. So it's building a framework where things are very familiar for them. It's preparing the child for what's coming up next. And we may already do that, but it's just being aware sometimes that... I'll give you an example of preparation as well. And it relates to some children who are very anxious. And if I'm able to give them information, they're able to stabilise. And if I don't, it's harder for them. So it might be, Mum, what are we doing on the weekend? Oh, don't worry about that, it's fine, we'll do something, I'll let you know closer to. And my strategy might be to think, well, they're worrying about it, they don't need to worry about it. But for some children, a lack of information is destabilising for them because there's no predictability there. There could be a myriad of things that are going to happen and they find it hard to stabilise. So it's much better to have information for them, some predictable pattern about what's coming up. Even if you make it up and you change it, it doesn't matter. But if they have some predictability, I think they're more able to stabilise. It's knowing that we need to prepare children for what's coming up, and also we need to prepare them for unstable or unpredictable environments, and that may be a biological visit. Now, it's going to occur, we need to prepare for it, we need to also be aware that there may be some triggering and they may come back in a state, but we need to at least encourage predictability before and after the visit. And predictability is familiarity, which means I'm going to stabilise quicker. I've been told what we're going to do, and then we do what I've been told, and I start to stabilise quicker. As I said before, it's constant communication with these children so that we explain what's happening in the immediate future and the short-term future, so that they're reassured about predictability. So we create predictability by speaking to them regularly about what's about to occur. And the other is being sensitive to transition experiences. Children with trauma struggle with transitions, whether that's large or small ones. It might be the end of the school year, beginning of the school year, beginning and the end of the day, transition in the car, transition to a biological visit and back. They are destabilising times, and the more predictability we can create around those times, the better they travel with it. So in each of these areas, I talk about the principle, the strategy, certain ideas around it, and the outcomes. Now, there's a lot of information in here, and I'm not expecting people to sort of pick it all up today, but I find this really useful, and I find it useful to also then relay, for carers to relay to child safety officers and teachers and education staff as well, to try and get them to marry in with strategies you might be using with the children. And so the other ideas are just setting very clear daily and weekly timetables to these children, but knowing they don't learn quickly, so there needs to be visual reminders of them. And also giving warnings on anything, any change or transition. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work, but there's a greater chance of them being able to manage it if you're preparing them for it. So that might be a 10, 5-minute, 1-minute warning on something. It may be having them being able to be aware of the timing of issues so they know how long. So that's predictable environment. The responsive environment is responding to children with an understanding that their trauma will guide their behaviours. So traumatised children will display behaviour which is experienced as difficult or challenging by others, but it makes sense in the context of their previous trauma. So it's important to understand that these children aren't behaving in a way out of the blue. This is what they needed to do to cope or survive. Unfortunately, it is no longer helpful for them, but they don't have the ability to prevent it occurring, at least initially. So traumatised children find it hard to internalise external rules and consequences, meaning that they find it very hard to recognise and remember rules and consequences in the home, which can be highly frustrating, obviously, as a carer. But again, it's about cues as well, so that visual cues are important. It's being aware also that we don't act in a way to reinforce their behaviour. So in the past, perhaps their aggressive behaviour was responded to with aggression, which reinforced it. And it's up to us to be able to manage our reactions to that, even when they're pushing our buttons. And knowing that ultimately, if we want change to occur, the first step is bringing their arousal down. because no learning is going to occur when they're in that sort of state. Again, as a way of learning, it's good to go over things with children. As I said before, they often don't bed things in memory. So it may be that if there's been an incident, it might be the following night in a calm way I say, look, I just wanted to go over what happened yesterday. I'm not angry with you now, but I just wanted to see what was going on for you, and I'll tell you what I saw and what we maybe need to learn about it. Now, I could say that to a child, but a child with trauma might trigger just with a statement like that. So I have to be so conscious of establishing safety and connection with that. So it may be that I need to be in a situation that's non-threatening for them. Now, I do that with when I'm doing couples work with couples without trauma, that sitting down and discussing relationship issues is stressful and they might find it hard. So one suggestion sometimes is going for a walk. A walk and talk is not so threatening. So sometimes it's trying to find, can I create a less threatening environment to be able to bring up some of these issues with the child? So the strategies are understanding the meaning of the behaviour and the purpose of the behaviour, for us to understand that it's often a traumatic response, is to sanction misbehaviour but stay connected with the child. Now we sort of do that anyway, trying to separate the child from their behaviour, but it's knowing with traumatised kids it's even more significant. You know what I mean? That something has occurred that's not appropriate, but I'm maintaining a connection with them, that we're safe. You know what I mean? We're not. And it's very primitive for them. So the safety might be more non-verbal than verbal. So the safety might be that I lower my tone, I slow my talking down, I come down to their level. As I said before, if it's appropriate with some kids, if I've got the relationship, that I might hug them or stroke them or put my hand on their shoulder. Because once there's a relationship there, that can bring arousal down very quickly. It's that safety mechanism. They suddenly feel safe and it comes down. Reinforce rules at a time of low stress, not high stress, with a neutral emotional tone. Otherwise, there's no learning going on. You don't try and establish rules when they're already in a stress state. It just doesn't work. One issue is the issue of time out, or the strategy of time in rather than time out. So one strategy is a time in strategy, and time in is just going into the room with them and sitting quietly. You're not trying to teach them anything at this stage, but you're trying to get them to bring their arousal down. And it might be that you start to slow your breathing down. You might let them know, look, I'm feeling stressed and this is what I'm doing. So one strategy is a time in strategy, and time in is just going into the room with them and sitting quietly. You're not trying to teach them anything at this stage, but you're trying to get them to bring their arousal down. And it might be that you start to slow your breathing down. You might let them know, look, I'm feeling stressed and this is what I'm doing. The crucial element all around this is the relationship that's maintained. It's important, even when there's been bad behaviour, to give strong signals that the relationship is still strong. It's maintaining that relationship. Otherwise, you're not going to get any listening or learning going on from these children. Some other ideas is track, record and acknowledge examples of when the child abides by the rules. Again, this comes back into a little bit to the pennies in the jar as well. Knowing that repetition is important for these children. Because it's a twofold purpose here. One is you're giving them positive strokes by saying, look, I'm really pleased when you did this at this time. So you're helping them with a positive self-image, but you're also looking for any opportunity for learning, knowing that with children like this, they need to learn 10 or 100 times more than other children. They need to 10 or 100 times more repetition of something occurring before they learn it. And so it's looking for every opportunity. The outcomes around this are really about the child becoming better able to have limits set, better able to understand when they're being triggered that it is not the present environment that is causing them fear, it's just a triggering. And that the relationship helps to bring them down as quickly as possible. So that over time, these children are better able to manage these triggering responses when they have them. I talked about responsive or restoration when there's been difficult behaviour. So questions that form part of a restorative approach have some value but may need to be modified for traumatised children. You may, as I said before, it's important to process positive behaviours because they may be very resistant to you bringing up bad behaviours or negative behaviours. And so there's some of the questions that might be asked is, what do you remember happening? So you might need to provide with them a summary of the event because when they're being triggered, maybe they don't recall things very well. What did you do? A helpful question, but be mindful they may not remember. How did you feel when it was happening? This is often a really important question for them to start to understand what's the behaviour, what's the experience. And to be more specific, you could add, okay, how did you feel in your head? How did you feel in your body? Because often, when I'm working with clients of any age, one approach I will say to clients is that to change, that people have patterns that are problematic. And we want to change them. They might be thinking patterns, they might be behavioural patterns. The first step in changing a pattern is familiarity. Because the more familiar I am with it, the more I'm likely to notice it when it's happening, not 6 hours down the path. So it's important for the children to start to understand the pattern that they have, because the more familiar they are, the more they may be able to start to catch it as it's occurring. I'm having this pattern again where it feels like I'm under threat from mum, but it's not. I'm just having this trauma triggering. The question to avoid is the last one there, is why did you do that? They clearly would not have any idea on why they did it, and asking them that question is likely to just create difficulty. It's recognising that very little thinking is going on often at that time. As I said to you before, when a child is triggered into a sort of a traumatic response, there's a lot of neuroscience that shows that the thinking brain closes down. They're not able to think, they're not listening, they're moving into the sort of primitive fear-based system that's based in the limbic system, which is designed to protect. So it's the fight or flight response. So it's a primitive system that we have adapted from the animal kingdom, really, to protect us from danger. So these children at one stage needed this adaptive pattern to protect them from danger. They no longer need it, but it still gets triggered. So it's knowing that when they're triggered, that's what's happening to them. And as I said before, sometimes it's useful to think about, if I was having a panic attack, how might I experience it, to get a sense on how these children may be experiencing it at the time. So a tuned environment is about us being attuned to the child, and also the child being attuned to their own arousal and feelings. So traumatised children are not attuned to the way they feel because they have a limited vocabulary of feeling words or understanding of that. As I said before, it's helping them to better understand feelings, and that's recognising the bodily sensations of feelings and giving words to it. They're often reflective, their responses are often impulsive rather than thoughtful. And this doesn't allow them time to reflect on how they're feeling and how they might respond to a situation. So if someone upset me, my response, if I've got time and not impulsive, is to think, okay, what you said upset me, I'm going to let you know that. I didn't like it what you said to me then. But if I'm impulsive, then if someone upsets me, I might just have a crack at them. I might just jump them or run away because I'm just having a reaction. And it's helping them to slow this process down, understand the process, and better skill themselves to respond to situations where it's distressing for them. And help them understand, I guess, that sometimes what's happening is this traumatic response where it feels like I'm under threat, it feels like I'm in danger, but I'm not. And if I've got a relationship with someone, a strong relationship with someone who's around me at the time, the more I'm willing to allow them to tune into me and for me to come down. So it's knowing that connection is a big part of assisting the child in reducing their arousal. So the strategies around this are reflect the child's emotional state, give words to their experiences, give multiple sources of feedback to track the child's emotional state. So it may be that they're highly aroused and they're not really getting it, but I might say to them, look, I've noticed you're tapping your feet, you're scratching yourself. I'm seeing signs that, for me, make it look like you're getting stressed at the moment. Because as I do that, over time, they'll start to recognise, oh, I am edgy at the moment. I don't know what's going on. Maybe I need to let someone know or do something about it. And with all that comes in into this window of tolerance, meaning if their arousal is in this moderate level, I can work with them. Once they flip the lid, it's gone. I can't work with them at all. So it's all these strategies around helping to be tuned into them and for them to be tuned to themselves as far as their emotional state. The next one, we'll take a break after this and then we can have just explore a few more. The next one is very similar to the previous one. It's the connection that we have with the child and the connection that they have with their feelings and their memories and sense of identity. So children are often disconnected from people generally. They're disconnected from their feelings and they're disconnected from their memories as well because they're not recalling things well. And perhaps they've had a history of often having feelings ignored. They've spent a lot of time feeling stressed or overwhelmed, which reduces their brain's capacity to understand experience. As I said before, when we're stressed, we're not processing information, we're not able to then recall it well. They have unstable memories and often their experiences of relationships are conflictual or disempowering, so they're nervous around relationships. The challenging task is how to do that with a child who is not willing to engage. It's a very challenging task to do. But part of them is helping them to connect by allowing them to get better at expressing feelings and having a vocabulary of feeling words. Helping them to understand and support them when they're experiencing feelings by often. We're modelling behaviour by saying, look, it seems like you're getting angry at the moment. I think when you said to me before, last time you got angry, you felt funny in the tummy. I'm getting a sense that you're feeling angry now and that what I just said caused that for you. If a child is able to maintain thinking, it assists them in not flipping into a fight or flight response. So if it's a moderate level where they're starting to engage in some of these behaviours or their arousal is going up, and you can tap into that, you can help to work them come back down again. So they're able to talk about things and to start to stabilise quicker. It's also finding ways for other people to be aware of and respond to the child's feelings. So we don't do a child any service if we're working with them in the home, but then they go to a school where there isn't a supportive environment there to assist them in managing their stress or managing their reactions. And the same, as I said earlier on, with child safety services, is them understanding what's going on for the child, and a key communicator of that is clearly the carer. So I think we'll take a 10-minute break. I'll then run through a little bit more of this, and then I'll also explain to you that we're planning to move the training modules that I'm developing onto an online component where we'll have them available online in shorter modules that you can run at your own time. We're developing an online forum to go with the training modules so that people can ask questions of each other. And the other aspect we're setting up with it as well is the Ask the Expert, meaning you can also put a question to me on the website about the training issues sort of thing. Because I know that face-to-face training is a small component of learning. So we can come in here today and discuss stuff, but it's the ongoing process of developing skills, seeing how they work, seeking help or feedback on how it's going is the most important part of this. So just so you're aware of that, because there's a huge amount of information here which I think is all relevant, but it does take time to understand it and then be able to utilise it. As I said, in me developing this over months, every time I went through it I was learning more about it. But I was also learning about situations. I could then recall situations with children that made sense in regards to this that helped me too. The T in the practice model is translating. And I've used that term before, but it's important to understand that our role as a carer is often as a translator. It's our role to translate the child's experiences into a format that they understand. As I said before, traumatised children's memory has been impaired, and so they don't remember things well. So that their episodic memory, as I said before, their memory of time chronologically is impaired, and they don't remember things in a chronological manner. And we need to be very strategic in helping them to do that. As I said before, if we don't remember things in a chronological manner, we don't remember patterns. We don't remember things that happen with certain people or associated with certain times of the day. And it can seem like, if we're not aware of that, that the children are being oppositional, where in fact they're not being oppositional, they're having difficulty in recalling. So it makes them, it's our role to try and help them to remember events, to recall them, and to understand the meanings of them. And it's also helpful for us to help them develop stories of their own life as well, because they may not have a good understanding of it and they need some stability around that. To help them translate their feelings and responses. So, as I said before, it's helping them with a vocabulary of feeling words. It's helping them to understand when they're being triggered, what might be causing that, how to understand that. So the strategies might be creating a regular opportunity to review with the child what they've done that day or that week. Support the child to generate stories about experiences. Help them in different ways to record memories and events. And provide continuity from one story to the next as well. So as much as I said that they struggle to remember things in chronological order, they may struggle to connect one event with the next. So it might be helping them to understand. So remember last time you visited mum and dad, just before you left, you said this or they were going to do that, which sort of helps them then connect that with the next visit if it's coming up. So sort of strategies around that to help them bed in good memory, and when they bed that memory in, they're better able to remember what happened last time, to learn from it, or to bring things up. And the other may be projecting into the future positive stories for them as well.
Would it be worthwhile to take photos of events and then have like a board in the kitchen or in the child's room and blue tack them up?
Very much so. So one of the things I recommend here is that use of photos as a storyboard and a storyline, because as I said before, it's visual cues that often help, and photos as far as a storybook of their life, but it may also be as a visual timetable. So for some children, they're better with a visual timetable than words saying this happens and then this happens. So it might be that there's a visual timetable, which a photo of this, then that, so you use photos, or it might be a photo to help them recall what's going on, or it might be a photo or a range of photos that you use to help them start to understand their family of origin, their relationships with people. And as I said before, learning is going to come through a high level of repetition. So whereas with one child you might do this once a week, you may do it, multiple times a day with some of these children, so they start to understand and get stability around their family structure, their family of origin. But it is understanding that those visual cues and photographs are really helpful for these kids. The I in practice is the involving element, and that's promoting children's participation in relational activities. So it's knowing that children, as I said before, have poor maps to guide them in making friends. They find it difficult to tolerate the feelings of others and therefore don't know how to respond. And they're particularly prone to feeling humiliated in social exchanges because of previous experiences of shame. So it may be that in a simple experience, in a school environment where kids are mildly stirring each other, a traumatised child may feel a huge amount of humiliation and shame and overreact to situations. They often fail to interpret social cues So they haven't had the ability to develop understanding and pick up on social cues. They feel isolated and different from their peers, and quite often they'll be socially inappropriate in their behaviour to try and engage with peers, and as a result are often frequently ostracised in the school environment. What I find when I'm working with carers with kids with trauma is sometimes it's a very detailed choreographing of them making friends, particularly this is outside school. So we'd have a very structured plan if they're going to have a friend coming over, what they're doing, what to expect, what might happen, what you're willing to share, a whole lot of things. Where with other children you might just assume they'll be fine with that. So the strategies around this element, the involving element, is helping these children identify peers, so friends at school, who they have some affinity with. So to understand who might be someone who would be interesting to me, who might be someone who is a good friend to me. So most of these kids haven't learnt these skills, and so they need a level of strategy around identifying who are good for me and who aren't. Helping them to develop practical steps in taking part in activities with peers. So a lot of these kids don't know how to engage in peer activity. So if the kids are playing soccer, it's rehearsing. So what are you going to say? Let's say I'm the kid on the soccer field and you want to come over and play the game. Let's rehearse what you might say. Now they might think, oh, well, I don't need to do that. And I'll say, well, look, I think it's going to help you. And sometimes I might be rehearsing a little bit of difficulty. So, how do I handle it if there's a little bit of a challenge or something like that as well? But they need practice around this. And without practice, they're not going to engage with peers and then have peer relationships. They're just going to be isolated. As I said before, the next step here is provide opportunities for the children to share routine activities with peers. So this is sort of like simple activities. It might be kicking the ball. It might be having something to eat. Just simple activity where there's not too much pressure on communication, but they're starting to become comfortable around these people, and the peers are comfortable with them. Establish a routine of providing feedback about friendship development to these children in a low-stress environment. So as I said before, a lot of these issues are going to be very challenging for a child to listen to. So if I'm going to talk to a child about some of these strategies, I might need to do it in a very low-stress environment. Now, some other ideas around this on this page, it talks about teaching children to engage in cooperative games rather than competitive ones. Because quite often their past experiences has been one of a high level of competition for food, for a whole lot of things. And often they're far too competitive in nature. And when they engage in activity or sporting activities, they engage at such a heightened competitive level that they're quite aggressive. And it's trying to teach them some level of a more cooperative way of engaging, and that might be designing activities that are more cooperative rather than competitive. As I said before, assist children to rehearse social experiences. I think role modelling and rehearsing is really important, and I do it a lot with children where I'm saying to them, let's just have a practice about what you're going to say today when you meet so-and-so. Let's just rehearse it. I do that with adults as much as with children around situations that they might find stressful. Because if I find a situation stressful, it may be that when I get to that situation, if I haven't rehearsed what I'm going to say, I'm going to get nervous and not know what to say. So we do it as adults, let alone as kids. So the ability to rehearse means that if I'm in a situation where I'm trying to engage in the soccer game, even though I'm feeling stressed, I remember I've practiced this a few times. So I can still remember it, I can still say what I wanted to say. So that rehearsal is really good for the children because they probably have had very poor role modelling, as I said, and a lack of experience about being assisted in developing friendships. It's also recognising that quite often they're developmentally delayed in their understanding of friendships, so it may be teaching about what to expect from friends. Who is a good friend? So if so-and-so took your bag today, do you think he's a good friend? I know you hang around him all day. but I'm not sure if he's a good friend. So helping them understand what to expect from friends as well. Because their past and their modelling is often very poor. And so part of that is being able to have regular dialogue with the children about what's gone on during the day, helping them translate that to understand what went on for them and the other, because they may not be picking up on a whole lot of things, including social cues. And then providing them with some feedback around how you might see it and what might be strategic or helpful for them the next time they're back at school. Because without that translating and assisting, they're not understanding, they're not learning, and they're not actually developing relationships. They won't develop peer relationships. And as I said before, if it's having a child come to your home, it's choreographing it in quite a lot of detail. So it's quite a stable routine. We know what to expect, we know what to expect of the other, so that they are provided with as much safety as possible. Because the last thing a child like this wants is for you to set up a play date, if you want to use that term, and for it to fall over. It's the last thing you want to have from them, because it's just devastating. It's hard enough for them to be able to feel confidence in doing something. And so the structured routine, the predictable routine, an activity that's very clear as far as rules and expectations is really important. And that's why I find in school sometimes it's promoting from the teachers to organised structured games that are monitored by the teachers. So it might be some kids who struggle in peer relationships, but if they were engaged in a game of soccer where the rules were clear and there was a teacher sort of monitoring it, it's a nice, safe environment to start to engage with people, where the child might otherwise distance from everybody and not feel confident enough to walk up and speak to someone or engage with peers in any way. So those sort of structured activities are a really helpful way of initiating peer relationships for kids with trauma. So as I said before, encouraging them with cooperative games rather than competitive ones, rehearsing social experiences, being a role model, being aware of being a role model. And so with children, as a carer, everything is a potential learning experience, because it's set up a positive, confident engagement with someone. And once he engaged with someone, he was fine. It was just that initial nervousness. So rehearsing shaking hands, rehearsing saying hello, what am I going to say? Because often our arousal peaks at the start of an engagement with someone. Once we settle in, it comes back down and we're much more skilled and able then to communicate with them. And the other may be encouraging these children to work or help younger children, where it's a safer environment for them as well, but they're still developing skills, but in an environment that's easier and safer for them initially, until they skill up to a level where they're more able to engage with peers of the same age. The second last element is the calming element, and this is helping children to calm body and mind. So, as I said before, children won't learn in an environment where they're stressed or there's trauma going on. And when they do have a flip the lid experience, the thinking brain closes down. There's no ability for them to think their way out of a situation once they've been triggered with trauma. So it's creating a calming environment, but it's also helping them to calm themselves. So developing calming strategies for all adults supporting the children, so they understand the context of the child's traumatic behaviour. So I think that initially, if we learn calming strategies, we can then help the child to learn calming strategies. And if we take it back, we talk about trauma, but often there's a level of attachment problems that are going on. Because in attachment, I'm bonding with my child, and when they're in distress, I'm soothing them. So there's this distress, soothing, and then as they get a little bit older, they're able to go away from me and come back and get soothed. So I've learned as a child that if I'm in distress, I go to an adult and they calm me. These children don't have that pattern. So it's understanding that as well, that when they're feeling vulnerable or distressed, they will not engage, and it's trying to help them to engage and then to calm. So if they're left on their own, they will struggle to bring their arousal down. They're more likely to stay in a frightened, heightened state. And that's why, as I said, the timeout procedure, quite often, rather than de-escalating, will escalate their state of arousal or their stress. So it's developing calming strategies and then promoting those with the children. It's practicing ways, as I said, of checking in on where their arousal is at or where their feelings are at and what they need to do about it. So that means a regular checking in, because the more frequent the checking in, the less likely there is for an escalation to occur where they've got to a point where they can't bring themselves back down again. I've noted here, focus on your own self-care in the face of tension too, because it's difficult to cope with working with traumatised kids. And the other factor, as I said before, is they will pick up on non-verbal cues. They will pick up on your tone of voice, your facial gestures, your clenching of your fingers, not necessarily what's being said. So if you can't stay calm with them, they're going to pick up on it. So that ability to regulate your own arousal is really important. And there's a mirroring that goes on naturally. If we start to slow our speech down, slow our breathing down, it affects the other who starts to mirror the same behaviour. So mirroring is a big part of role modelling, is knowing not just role modelling where we learn over time, but where we learn immediately. The child starts to mirror our behaviour. The last one, again, is a bit repetitive of the other ones. It's an engaging element. So most of these children have poor working models of engaging with adults. They've had experience of adults not meeting their needs, not being able to trust them, where they've felt unpredictable, where they've been hurt by adults, and they're unsure how to have any control or influence over adult behaviour or communication. So it's recognising that they are initially coming from a point of not feeling safe and not a lack of willingness to communicate or connect. And as I said before, it's for children to have a number of reference points to be able to connect with. One obviously is a foster carer, but can I help the child to skill up, and can I help the reference points to skill up to be a reference point for the child? Like, so in the school environment, there might be the teacher, there might also be an assistant principal or a teacher's aide. In other situations, is there a reference point? If they're going for a biological visit, is there a reference point there? Might that be the caseworker or the support worker? But it's helping them to understand that and what to do if they become destabilised. Because if you don't give them a strategy and talk to them about it, they won't know what to do at the time, and they'll suffer more stress or trauma as a result. So connection points are stabilising points. And connection points don't have to be significant conversation. As I said before, a connection point might be the card system on the wall. But because I've moved the card up to the angry bear, I know the teacher's going to see that. I've just connected with her. We haven't said anything, but I feel a level of communication that might feel, and she might look at me and I go, oh, okay, she's seen that. There's a connection. I'm stabilising a little bit just because of that. So it's also knowing connection doesn't have to be a deep and meaningful conversation, but it's a sense of checking in and then the adult responding to that signal. So if the check-in is I'm up here, it's the adult trying to help either directly or assisting me in bringing my arousal down through giving me opportunity to lead the class or strategies or things like that. So as I said before, the most obvious thing with kids with trauma is a blocked trust. They have disconnected from adults and there's often a strong resistance to engage. There's a resistance to be vulnerable, to talk about feelings because it puts them in an unstable state. And we talked about before the common experience that a child might be highly aggressive and then at some point their arousal comes down and they get highly distressed. And that's where there's this meaningful connection going on. And it's important as part of that to be restorative, which is don't allow them to develop shame around experiences of bad behaviour. It's important to address it, but if it reinforces shame, it is doing them a disservice, and we're not repairing or improving our relationship with them or their sense of positive self-worth. And as I said before, the more positive they feel about themselves, the more buoyant they are. So the more positive, the more they can cope with things not going the way they want and not overreacting to it. Okay, let's leave it there for today, and then we'll have just discussion about some of these issues and others.